The council mocked, until humans left without a word part. The great chamber of the Galactic Concordance Council hung in the silent dark of space, wrapped in the soft blue glow of Viridia Prime's orbital ring. Inside, 200 species sat in tiered arcs, their voices a low hum of clicks, whistles, and translated speech. At the very back, near the shadowed edge where the light barely reached, sat Daniel Carter. He wore a plain gray suit, slightly wrinkled from too many days of wear, and his hands rested calmly on the smooth surface of his console. His face showed no anger, no pride, just quiet attention. For over 40 years, Earth had held a seat on the council, not because they were powerful, not because they controlled vast fleets or rare resources, but because they had once saved a dying colony ship from the Velnari during the Dust Wars. That act of mercy had earned them a place at the table, but not respect. To most of the council, humans were loud, messy, and too quick to feel. They cried at funerals, laughed too loudly at peace talks, and often asked questions no one else dared to ask. Today's session was about the Keswick Expanse, a stretch of space near the galaxy's rim where a red giant star was collapsing. Around it orbited 3 small worlds home to simple life, moss-like plants, burrowing insects, and sky floaters that drifted on thermal winds. The Concordance had voted to harvest the star's core for energy before it went supernova, standard procedure, efficient, clean. Then Daniel stood, all eyes turned, some with curiosity, most with mild annoyance. He cleared his throat softly and spoke in calm, measured tones. "I request a delay in the extraction order." A ripple of murmurs passed through the chamber. Cathar, the Velnari ambassador, tilted his segmented head. His voice came through the translator as a dry rasp. "On what grounds, human? The star is already dying. Its energy is wasted if not harvested." Daniel didn't flinch. "The life on those worlds may be simple, but it's native, unique. Once the star is drained, the planets freeze. Everything dies." Cathar let out a sound like stone grinding on stone, Velnari laughter. "You would halt a 1 billion credit operation. For moss?" The chamber erupted. The Thalassians clicked in amusement. The Zenth delegates waved their frilled hands in disbelief. Even the usually neutral Krell snorted through their breathing masks. One delegate muttered into their mic. Typical human sentimentality. Daniel waited until the noise faded. Then he said, "We've lost enough worlds to efficiency. Maybe it's time we saved one." Silence followed, not out of agreement but out of sheer disbelief. No one had ever argued for non-sentient life in a resource vote. It was seen as wasteful, even childish. The council president, a tall, silver-skinned being from the Orlan Collective, sighed and said, "The motion to delay is noted. Vote will proceed as scheduled." The result was never in doubt. 200 votes. 1 dissent. After the session, Daniel walked alone through the curved corridors of Viridia Prime. Other delegates passed him without a glance. Some avoided his path entirely, as if his humanity might rub off on them. He didn't mind. He'd expected this. In fact, he'd prepared for it. Back in his quarters, a small windowless room with a single bed, a desk, and a data terminal, he sat down and opened a secure channel. The screen flickered to life, showing the face of a woman with short brown hair and sharp green eyes. Her name was Elena Ruiz, and she was Earth's Minister of Off-World Affairs. "You were voted down," she said. It wasn't a question. Predictably, Daniel replied. She leaned closer. "Is it time?" He looked at the blank wall behind her, then at his own reflection in the dark screen. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded once. "Phase out." Elena didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply gave a short, sharp nod. Message received. "All stations will begin quiet shutdown in 12 hours. The call ended. Daniel sat in the silence, listening to the hum of the station's life support. Outside stars burned cold and distant. He thought of Earth, of rain on rooftops, of children playing in parks, of old men arguing over chess in city squares. He thought of how humans built hospitals on war-torn moons, shared food with starving aliens, and patched up enemies after battles ended. And he thought of how the council had laughed every time. They never understood. They saw kindness as weakness, compassion as chaos, but humans knew better. They knew that saving a single life, even a moss-covered rock, was worth more than 1,000 credits. Daniel stood, walked to the small closet, and pulled out a worn duffel bag. He packed slowly, A change of clothes, a photo of his niece, a small wooden carving of an owl his grandfather had made. He left everything else, the ceremonial robes, the data pads, the official badge that marked him as Earth's voice in the galaxy. Before he left the room for the last time, he placed a single note on the desk. It read, "We tried to belong." Then he walked out, not looking back. In the docking bay, a small human freighter waited, its engines already humming softly. The pilot, a young man named Jake Miller, gave him a quick nod as he boarded. No words were needed. They both knew what came next. As the ship pulled away from Viridia Prime, Daniel watched the station shrink in the viewport. Somewhere inside, the council was already moving on to the next agenda item. Trade tariffs, border disputes, fleet deployments. They wouldn't notice the humans leaving, not at first. But they would notice when the silence grew too loud. For now, though, there was only the quiet hum of the engine, the soft glow of the control panel, and the endless dark ahead. Daniel leaned back in his seat, closed his eyes, and let the ship carry him home. Not to a planet, but to a people who finally chose themselves over the approval of those who never deserved it. The council mocked, until humans left without a word. Part 2. Across the galaxy, human outposts began to go quiet, not with alarms or announcements, but with the soft click of a switch turned off for the last time. At the Helios shipyards near Proxima Centauri, Foreman Luis Ramirez stood on the main gantry, watching the last human-built freighter drift away from its moorings. The ship's name, painted in faded white letters, read, "Evening Star." It carried no crew, no cargo, just empty corridors and silent engines. Luis had ordered it launched on autopilot toward deep space, a final act of respect for the work they'd done. He turned and walked back through the yard. Tools lay neatly on benches. Coffee mugs sat half full on desks. Everything looked normal, as if the workers had just stepped out for lunch. But they wouldn't be coming back. One by one, the human staff had boarded shuttles over the past week, leaving behind only their uniforms and a few personal notes. Luis was the last. He carried a small metal box under his arm. Inside were the shipyard logs, engineering schematics, and a handwritten list of every worker who had ever served there. He placed it on the central console, then tapped a command into the terminal. The lights dimmed. The air recyclers slowed. The yard went to sleep. On the agri-world of Series 9, botanist Maya Ellis knelt in the red soil, her gloves stained with dirt. Around her, fields of golden wheat swayed in the thin breeze. This strain had been engineered by human scientists to grow in low-gravity, high-radiation environments. It fed over 30 alien colonies. Now Maya harvested the last of it, not for shipment but for seed. She filled dozens of small canisters, labeled them carefully, and uploaded the full genetic sequence to the public concordance archive. Her note read, "For whoever tends the soil next." She walked back to the research dome as the twin suns dipped below the horizon. Inside, her team was gone. Only her boots echoed on the metal floor. She powered down the hydroponic bays, sealed the greenhouse fence, and locked the main door behind her. Then she boarded the waiting shuttle, leaving the dome dark and still. Farther out near the edge of known space, Medical Officer Ben Carter, no relation to Daniel, stood in the hallway of the orbital clinic Hope's Light. The station had treated wounded soldiers from 5 different wars, patched up refugees, and even delivered alien babies. Now its corridors were empty. Ben carried a single med kit. He checked every room one last time. Beds made, supplies stocked, diagnostic tools powered down. In the main ward, he left a crate of antibiotics and painkillers with a sign that read, "Take what you need." He stepped into the escape pod, sealed the hatch, and fired the thrusters. As the clinic shrank behind him, he didn't look back. Back on Viridia Prime, the Concordance Council noticed nothing unusual at first. Human trade ships were late, that happened sometimes. A few medical aid requests went unanswered, but humans were known to take breaks during their emotional recovery periods, as the Zenth called them. The Council assumed Earth was sulking after the Keswick vote. They expected an apology or at least a request to rejoin discussions, but days passed, then weeks. The first real sign came when the quantum comms relay near Tau Ceti went offline. Human engineers had maintained it for decades, patching its organic circuits with a mix of tech and intuition no other species understood. Without them, the signal degraded. Messages between sectors grew delayed, then garbled. The Thalassian collective complained loudly, but no human technician responded to repair calls. Then the food shipments stopped. Colonies that relied on Series 9 wheat began rationing. The Krell, who used human-designed filtration systems in their underwater cities, reported rising sickness rates. Their own engineers couldn't fix the biofilters. Human schematics used symbols and shorthand that made no sense to outsiders. Still, the council refused to panic. Cathar waved a dismissive claw during a session. They'll return. Humans crave attention. They cannot stay silent long. But the silence only grew deeper. On the mining moon of Draxus 4, human supervisors had run the deep core drills with unmatched precision. When they vanished, the machines began overheating. Within days, 3 drills melted down, taking half the moon's output with them. The local governor sent frantic messages to Earth's embassy, only to find it locked, dark, and empty. At the same time, in the quiet corners of the galaxy, humans gathered. Small shuttles met in hidden systems. Families reunited aboard repurposed freighters. Scientists, farmers, soldiers, teachers, all carried the same message: go home. Not to Earth, not yet, but to the fleet waiting beyond the Veil Nebula, where New Haven was being built. Luis Ramirez arrived there first. He stepped onto the central platform of the lead ARC ship and found Maya Ellis already there, studying soil samples under a lamp. Ben Carter joined them an hour later, his medkit now full of supplies salvaged from 10 different stations. They didn't hug. They didn't cheer. They simply nodded as if saying, "You made it too." No one spoke of the council. No one mentioned the mocking laughter or the lonely votes. They talked instead about water recycling systems, crop rotation plans, and how to shield children from cosmic radiation. Practical things. Human things. Back on Viridia Prime, junior analyst Nira Solis, a young woman with human eyes and Zenth skin, sat late in the archives. She'd been tracking human activity for weeks. Her screen showed a map of the galaxy, dotted with red markers where human presence had vanished. The pattern was clear: total withdrawal. No attacks, no threats, just gone. She found a final transmission buried in Earth's public feed. It was short, signed by the president herself. "We tried to belong. Now we choose to be." Nira stared at the words for a long time. Then she saved the message, closed her terminal, and walked out into the quiet corridor. For the first time, she felt ashamed, not for herself, but for the council that had laughed while losing something it never understood. Out in the black, the last human freighter crossed the edge of known space. Its lights were off. Its comms were silent. Inside, a child slept in a bunk, wrapped in a blanket stitched with stars. Her mother sat nearby, reading a book printed on real paper. Outside, the galaxy spun on, unaware that the quiet ones had already left and taken their light with them. The council mocked, until humans left without a word part. 3 months had passed since the last human voice was heard on any concordance channel. At first, the silence was met with smug certainty. Cathar told anyone who would listen that humans were staging a dramatic retreat to force the council into begging them back. Others claimed Earth was dealing with internal chaos, rebellion, plague, or another of their emotional collapses. No one believed they were truly gone, but the galaxy began to crack without them. On the border between Krell and Zenth space, a minor dispute over mining rights flared into open conflict. In the past, human mediators would have stepped in, calm, patient, offering compromises that honored both sides' dignity. Now, with no one to bridge the gap, warships lined up. The Krell fired first. The Zenth retaliated. Within days, 3 colonies were burning. The council called an emergency session. Delegates shouted over each other, each blaming the other for failing to act. No one mentioned that the humans used to handle exactly this kind of crisis. Not with force, but with long talks over shared meals and handwritten letters of understanding. Meanwhile, on Viridia Prime, the air grew thick and stale. The biofilters in the life support system, designed by human engineers decades ago, were failing. Alarms had been ignored at first, dismissed as minor glitches. But now a strange mold bloomed in the ventilation shafts. Workers coughed. Some collapsed. The Thalassian medical team tried to clean it, but the system's logic was built on human intuition, not pure code. It responded to rhythms, not commands. Without the humans who understood its quirks, it was dying. Counselor Vex of the Thalassian Collective stood before the chamber. her silver robes trembling with frustration. We cannot breathe clean air. Our comms are failing. Our borders bleed. And still no one knows where the humans are. Cathar rose, his exoskeleton clicking. They are hiding, waiting for us to call them back with honors. Do not give them that satisfaction. But doubt had taken root. Even his own aides avoided his gaze. Deep in the data archives, Nira Solis worked late again. She had spent every night since the Exodus tracing human movements. She found no battle fleets, no secret bases near Earth, no distress signals. Instead, she uncovered a pattern of quiet departures. Stations powered down in order. Ships launched on autopilot into dead zones. Medical supplies left in open bays for anyone to take. It wasn't an escape. It was a farewell. Then she found it. A final broadcast from Earth's capital, sent on an open frequency just before all human networks went dark. The president's face appeared on the screen, tired but calm. She spoke only one sentence. We tried to belong. Now we choose to be. Nira played it 3 times. Each time her chest tightened. She printed the transcript, folded it carefully, and slipped it into her pocket. The next day she requested a private audience with the council president. She was denied. So she did something no junior analyst had ever done. She walked onto the main floor during session and stood at the human delegates' empty station. All conversation stopped. I have proof, she said, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. The humans are not coming back. They left by choice, and we are falling apart without them, Cathar hissed. You speak like a child. Humans are weak. Their absence proves nothing. Nira looked at him, then at the rows of silent delegates. Then why can't we fix our own air? No one answered. That night, a team of engineers from 5 species tried to reboot the biofilter core. They followed the manuals, ran diagnostics, replaced parts. Nothing worked. One young engineer, a human-trained apprentice from the Orlan system, whispered. They always hummed to it. Said it liked music. The others laughed until he played an old Earth lullaby through the system's audio port. For 3 minutes, the filters cleared. Then they failed again. The music wasn't the fix. The humans were panic, quiet but spreading, moved through the corridors of power. Trade slowed. Travel routes were rerouted. Colonies that once relied on human-built jump gates now reported unstable transitions, ships arriving damaged or not at all. The gates hadn't been maintained since the Exodus. Human technicians used to walk them daily, adjusting harmonics by ear, tuning them like instruments. No one else knew how. On a remote listening post near the Galactic Rim, a sensor operator picked up a faint signal. It was a human freighter moving fast, heading deeper into uncharted space. No response to hails, no identification code, just a shadow on the screen vanishing into the dark. Back on Viridia Prime, the council held another session. This time no one mocked. No one laughed. They spoke in low voices about contingency plans and cultural preservation. Cathar sat in silence, his usual arrogance replaced by something unfamiliar. Fear. Nira watched from the gallery. She thought of her mother, who had been human, who used to tell her stories about Earth's oceans and forests. She remembered how her mother cried when she heard a violin, how she always shared her food with strangers, how she believed kindness was the strongest force in the universe. Now that force was gone, and the galaxy, for the first time, felt cold. In the distance, beyond the reach of concordant sensors, a fleet of human ships orbited a quiet moon. On its surface, foundations were being laid for New Haven. No flags flew, no anthems played. But children ran through half-built corridors laughing. Gardens were planted in recycled containers. Engineers shared tools without asking. They didn't miss the council. They didn't even think about it. They were simply building a world where being human wasn't a joke, but a quiet, steady truth. And somewhere in the void, the last echo of their presence lingered. Not in monuments or messages, but in the empty spaces where their kindness used to be. The council mocked, until humans left without a word part. For without humans, the galaxy began to forget how to heal itself. The peacekeeping algorithms that once guided conflict resolution started producing strange results, ordering blockades instead of talks, demanding surrender instead of compromise. The code had been written by human ethicists who understood nuance, regret, and second chances. Now, without their oversight, it ran cold and rigid, turning small disputes into full wars. On the planet Varel, a farming colony shared by 3 species. Riots broke out over water rights. In the past, a human aid team would have arrived within hours, bringing filters, mediators, and extra rations. This time no one came. The Concordance sent drones, but they only recorded the chaos. No hands reached out to help. No voices said, "Let's sit and talk." Within a week, the colony split in 2, and the fields burned. The jump gates continued to fail. Ships emerged from transit with warped hulls or scrambled minds. Pilots reported hearing whispers in Earth languages, old songs, fragments of poetry before the gates went dark for good. Engineers tried to copy human maintenance logs, but the notes were full of phrases like "feels off today" or "give it a tap near the 3rd coil." Machines couldn't understand feeling. Cathar no longer spoke in council sessions. He sat in silence, his claws folded, his eyes fixed on the empty human station. Even his fellow Velnari avoided him. The laughter that once filled the chamber after mocking Earth had vanished, replaced by a heavy quiet. Then came the rumors. A trader from the Outer Rim claimed he saw a fleet of human ships near the Ghost Veil Nebula, silent, dark, moving in perfect formation. Another said a derelict hospital station, long abandoned, had been found fully stocked with medicine and clean water, its doors unlocked, its lights on. No humans inside, just supplies neatly arranged with a note, "For those in need." Some called it a ghost story. Others whispered that humans had become something else, watchers in the dark, leaving help but never showing their faces. Far from all this, on a small moon orbiting a nameless red dwarf, life grew steady and quiet. New Haven rose from the gray rock like a promise. Solar panels spread across the surface, catching the dim light. Greenhouses bloomed with wheat, tomatoes, and flowers no one had seen in years. Children played in courtyards built from salvaged ship hulls. Daniel Carter stood on a ridge overlooking the settlement. Beside him stood Maya Ellis, her hands tucked in her coat pockets, watching a group of kids chase each other through a half-finished plaza. Luis Ramirez walked up carrying a steaming mug of real coffee, beans grown in Greenhouse 3. "They'll find us eventually," Luis said. "Maybe," Daniel replied. "But not today." They had chosen this place because it was forgotten. No maps marked it. No trade routes passed nearby. It was a blank spot in the galaxy's memory, and that was exactly what they needed. Down in the central workshop, Ben Carter taught a group of teenagers how to stitch wounds using thread and steady hands. "Machines break," he told them, "but your hands won't lie to you." Nearby, engineers rebuilt engines not from manuals but from memory and trial. Artists painted murals on bulkheads, scenes of Earth's oceans, forests, city skylines at dusk. No one asked if it was practical. They did it because it felt right. There were no presidents here, no ambassadors, no council seats. Decisions were made in open circles where a farmer's voice mattered as much as a pilot's. If someone was sad, others sat with them. If someone was hungry, food appeared. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Back in Concordance space, the collapse deepened. The biofilters on Viridia Prime finally gave out. Sections of the station were sealed off. Delegates wore breathing masks to sessions. Trade ships avoided the hub, fearing contamination. The once gleaming heart of galactic unity was rotting from the inside. Nira Solis stood before the council one last time. She held a data chip in her hand. "I've compiled everything," she said. "Every human invention, every medical breakthrough, every peace treaty they helped write. It's all here. But none of it works without understanding why they did it." She placed the chip on the central podium. They didn't build things just to function. They built them to care. No one took the chip. That night, Nira packed a small bag. She left her analyst badge on her desk along with a note. "I'm going to find what they left behind." She boarded a civilian shuttle bound for the Outer Rim, not knowing if she'd ever return. Meanwhile, on the edge of known space, a lone human shuttle drifted near a dying colony. Its sensors picked up signs of disease and starvation. The pilot, a woman named Chloe Reed, didn't hesitate. She opened the cargo bay and released a dozen supply pods, filled with medicine, seeds, and water purifiers. Then she turned her ship and vanished into the dark without a signal, without a word. The colonists found the pods at dawn. They opened them with trembling hands. Inside each one, wrapped around a vial of antibiotics, was a small paper star, folded by a child from New Haven. No one knew who sent it. But for the first time in months, someone cried, not from pain, but from hope. In the concordance, the silence grew heavier. Not just the absence of voices, but the absence of kindness, of second chances, of hands that reached out without asking for anything in return. And out in the void, humanity built not an empire, not a weapon, not a warning, but a home. A place where being human wasn't a joke whispered in council chambers, it was enough. The council mocked, until humans left without a word. Part 5. A full year had passed since the last human was seen in concordance space. The galaxy had not ended, but it had changed, not with explosions or invasions, but with a slow, quiet unraveling. Without human hands to mend what was broken, the systems that held civilization together began to fray at the edges. The council still met, but its sessions were shorter, quieter. Delegates spoke less of trade and power and more of loss. Cathar no longer attended. He had resigned, returning to his homeworld without explanation. In his place sat a young Velnari named Terrell, who had once studied human history in secret. She carried a small notebook filled with quotes from Earth poets and philosophers. No one mocked her for it. The breaking point came when the central comms network, the one humans had built and maintained for decades, finally collapsed. For 3 days the galaxy went dark. No messages. No warnings. No coordination. Panic spread. Then, just as suddenly, the signal returned. Not because the concordance fixed it, but because someone had left a backup node active in a dead sector. It broadcast on a loop, a simple tone followed by coordinates to a public archive of human knowledge. No voice, no demands. Just help, left behind like a gift. That was when the council voted, unanimously, without debate. They passed a resolution to preserve all human cultural records, to teach Earth's history in every academy, and to rename the failing comms network the Carter Relay, in honor of the quiet man who had once sat at the back of the chamber and asked them to spare a dying world. But the real change happened not in laws, but in hearts. Children on mixed-species colonies began drawing pictures of Earth, blue oceans, green forests, cities lit by street lamps. Teachers told stories of human doctors who worked through the night, of engineers who fixed machines with kindness as much as tools, of pilots who gave their last oxygen to strangers. These were not myths. They were memories, and they spread. Nira Solis never found New Haven. She traveled to a dozen abandoned human outposts, each one clean, empty, and strangely peaceful. In one, she found a classroom with desks still arranged in a circle. On the chalkboard, written in careful script, were the words, "Ask questions. Care deeply. Try again." She sat there for hours, crying quietly, not from sadness but from understanding. She returned to Viridia Prime not as an analyst, but as a teacher. She opened a small school in a quiet wing of the station. Her first lesson was on empathy. Her students, Krell, Zenth, Thalassian, even a young Velnari, listened with wide eyes. Out in the rim, the ghost sightings continued. A shuttle would appear near a starving colony, drop supplies, and vanish. A broken jump gate would hum back to life for just long enough to let a refugee ship through. No one ever saw a human face, but everyone knew who it was. On the moon where New Haven grew, life settled into rhythm. Crops thrived. Children learned to read under solar lamps. Daniel Carter walked the perimeter every evening, not as a leader but as a neighbor. He often stopped to talk with Luis about engine repairs or with Maya about soil pH levels. Sometimes he just sat and watched the stars. They had no plans to return, no desire to reclaim a seat at a table that never valued them. They had built something better. A place where worth wasn't measured in power or logic, but in how you treated the person next to you. One evening, a signal pinged on their long-range scanner. It was weak, encrypted, and marked with the old Earth diplomatic code. Daniel opened it alone. The message was short. "We miss you. We're sorry. If you ever come back, we'll listen." He read it 3 times. Then he deleted it. Not out of anger, but because it no longer mattered. They weren't waiting for an apology. They had already moved on. Still, he walked to the central plaza and gathered the community. He didn't show them the message. Instead, he said, "We have enough food for the winter. The greenhouses are strong. The kids are safe." That was all they needed to hear. Far away, on 100 worlds, people began to act differently. A Krell commander spared a Zenth ship instead of firing. A Thalassian engineer shared a water filter design for free. A young Velnari stood up in a school debate and said, "Maybe we should ask what the humans would do." No one laughed. The galaxy hadn't become perfect. Wars still happened. Mistakes were still made. But something had shifted. The idea that kindness was weakness had been proven false, not with weapons, but with absence. And in that absence, humanity's true legacy bloomed. Not in statues or names on buildings, but in the quiet choices people made when no one was watching, in the extra ration shared with a stranger, in the hand offered to an enemy, in the decision to save a moss-covered world, just because it deserved to live. The Council never saw humans again. But they felt them, in every act of mercy, every second chance, every time someone chose to care instead of conquer. And out beyond the stars, on a small moon lit by a red sun, a child folded a paper star and tucked it into a supply pod. Her mother smiled and said, "Someone will find it." The pod launched into the dark, carrying no flag, no message, no demand, just hope. And that was enough.